Hi and welcome! In today's video I am going to talk about all the books that I read in February. February is normally the month I think of as the longest month of the year because it just feels so long, especially after having like months of snow and cold. I'm just like sick of it. I'm not a winter person. I just long for spring. While technically there are less days in February than any other month of the year, it just feels so long, so it's kind of feels like the longest month of the year, even though it's not really. February for me was a really good reading month. I actually read 11 books, and of those 11 books I read 4 graphic novels and 1 play. But enough about that, let's get into the books. My name is Elin and this is Lunacha Books. The first book that I read was Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, and I borrowed this from Libby, so I read it on my Kobo. It's not the first time that I read it. This was actually a reread. I first read it back in, I think it was probably 1992, maybe 1993. I was picking it up from the school library and I just loved it. I read a Norwegian translation of the book. I think it was translated from the English to the Norwegian by André Bjerke. André Bjerke is a fairly well-known poet. He's like really clever with words, so I think he kind of writes in the same, maybe not the same spirit as Shakespeare, but he does it really well and recreates the play in a really good way. I think Romeo and Juliet is probably one of the most well-known romance stories of the world. Maybe not the world, but at least Europe, especially Britain maybe. I don't know. I don't think I need to go into details about the story because it is really well known, but it is like Romeo and Juliet and they come from families who are rivals. Of course they meet and fall in love. There's a lot of drama and a lot of stuff going on and it's very tragic, of course, but even though it's like a tragedy, it's still quite humorous because Shakespeare actually put a lot of humor into his tragedies. But enough about Romeo and Juliet. The next book that I read was All Princesses Die Before Dawn. It's a bit of a mouthful, and this is a graphic novel that I got from NetGalley. I have a review on my channel, so I will link to that down in the description box as well as up here somewhere. It was an okay read, as I said in my video. It's LGBTQIAP+, so I guess not the worst thing I could read, but slightly disappointing as well. Just go and look at my review so you can see in detail what I thought. The third book that I read was Concrete Rose by Angie Thomas. I read The Hate You Give last year. This is actually a prequel to the story. It's about Star's father. Star is the main character of The Hate You Give. I think that you can probably read this first. It doesn't really matter that much, but you can read it first before reading The Hate You Give, or you can read both of them as standalones. They both work very well on their own. This book deals with the life of Star's father. His name is Maverick. We meet him when he's about 16, I think. His dad is in jail and a member of the King Lord, which is a gang. His mom is a very hard-working woman. She has 2 jobs to take care of herself and her kids. Maverick is trying to help his family to pay bills because they don't have a lot of money, and he does this by selling drugs. When his girlfriend finds out that he's selling drugs, she breaks up with him. I think there's something else happening too that makes her break up with him. So a little bit of drama there as well. It is a really good read and it's set in the 90s, I think. I think it's set in the 90s. If I remember correctly. I really liked this book. It was a really good read. I could highly recommend both this and The Hate You Give. This is another prequel, and this is The First to Die at the End by Adam Silvera. If you have read They Both Die at the End, this story is set before that. This is the story about how Death Cast actually is created in a way. There's a lot of secrets that we don't know, and I don't know if there's going to be a follow-up to this, but Death Cast is on the very beginning of its life. In this book, we meet the people who get the first phone call from Death Cast. We follow the person who gets the first phone call as well as another character. I thought that this had a lot of similarities to the first book, though it's a different time frame and they do other things. I felt as if this had a little bit of the same feeling and it was quite similar in many ways. So I think that if you really enjoyed They Both Die at the End, you might like this as well, or you might be disappointed because it's so similar. I don't know. For me it was like an entertaining, nice emotional read. I quite enjoyed it. Did I reread it? I don't think so, because it's not like my favorite read or anything, but it wasn't bad. Then I read Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert. I read this for the sister along. This is the second book of the trilogy, and I have a reading blog and review video that I can link to down in the description box, as well as up in the here somewhere. This is probably the book of the three that I liked the most. There will be a third review, reading vlog kind of video coming up in April. I have the footage, mostly. That will happen. I have read the book. I just need to kind of make a closure to the whole thing. My next three reads were volume 2, 3 and 4 or Heartstopper. If you know me, you know by now that I absolutely love this series. I read the first volume in January because I got the first volume secondhand when I was in Ireland in July. Then I decided to read it, and I was planning on borrowing the rest from the library, but I was on the waiting list and it took forever. So when I found these really cheaply secondhand, I just decided to buy them, and I'm really happy that I did, because I think that these will be books that I will reread over and over again. I love them so much. So those are the three Heartstopper books. I just love them. After reading Heartstopper, I borrowed the book Flights from Libby, so I read it on my Kobo. I also have a reading vlog and review of that where I go into fairly detailed stuff, and I will leave a link to that video in the description box, as well as up here as usual. That's another book that I really liked. I am so happy that I read it. It was such an interesting read. And then book number 10 of February I don't have with me, because I had to hand this back to the library. This book is a young adult book. It's a Norwegian book and it's called Høyt or High Pressure. It's written by Jan Tore Noreng. It's a really thin book, but it's filled with action, and I think it's really good for young people who don't really like to read, but they kind of are into football maybe. This book is about football, or about a character who plays football. So we meet Mehmet, and he is the star of his team. He's a really good football player. His dad was really encouraging him and helping him on his way, but after he passed away, Mehmet kind of grieved, and playing football became even more important to him. His dream is to play football on one of the big teams and become a star. But then one day there's another boy who starts playing with them on the team. It turns out that he is really good as well. Then Mehmet gets really worried that this other boy will take his place on the team and that he will not make it as well as he hoped. Mehmet, he talks to his brother about this, about his worries, about how unhappy he is. His brother is a member of a gang. They do a lot of crimes and are up to not much good. Then his brother is like, but Mehmet, we can fix this for you. Just let me know and I'll fix this. And then Mehmet kind of agrees to do this. Then he realizes that it wasn't a joke, because first he thinks it's a joke. He goes like, oh god, this is more serious than I actually thought it would be. He realizes that maybe this wasn't a good idea. Lots of action. I'm not in the targeted group for this book, but I think it's a good book for the target group. Then the last read of February was The Witch's Heart. This is a book based on Norse mythology about Angraboda. I really enjoy this. I have made a reading blog. I'm not quite finished with it. It will be up on my channel at some point in time. Anyway, but I really enjoyed it, and it was a great end to February reading month. I also love the cover of this. It's so beautiful. Just love the whole Viking inspired. So that's it for this time. I hope you enjoyed. Please leave a comment. Let me know if you read any of the books, if you're planning on reading them, what you thought. Also, remember to subscribe, give the video a like, and that would make me super happy. Until next time, bye.